The coffee in Vivian Hartwell's hand was still warm when the man she'd married 6 hours ago knocked out two armed intruders in her hotel suite without spilling a drop of his own. He hadn't even raised his voice. He just stepped between her and the door, set down his glass with the same quiet precision she'd watched him use fixing engines in a parking garage 3 weeks ago, and moved. When it was over, he turned back to her like nothing had happened, like men didn't just crumple to the floor around him, and said, "Pack what you can't leave behind, we have 12 minutes." That was when Vivian understood that the man she thought she'd married, the struggling mechanic, the widowed father of a 6-year-old girl named Rosie, was someone else entirely. Someone the financial world had buried at sea 2 years ago. But she's getting ahead of herself. Let me take you back to where this really started. 3 weeks before that hotel room, before the wedding, before everything, the law office of Brennan and Holt occupied the 42nd floor of a building in downtown Chicago that smelled like inherited money and other people's decisions. Vivian Hartwell sat in a chair that probably cost more than her first car, wearing the blazer she'd bought specifically for investor meetings, charcoal gray, no wrinkles, no apologies, and tried to look like she belonged there. She did belong there. That was the thing nobody in this room seemed to understand yet. Mrs. Hartwell. The attorney, a silver-haired man named Douglas Brennan, folded his hands on the desk. "We appreciate your patience. The matter we've brought you here to discuss is somewhat unusual." Vivian had been told that already, twice, by two different people who hadn't told her anything else. "Unusual how?" she said. Not a question. She'd learned that trick early. In rooms like this, statements carried more weight than questions. Brennan exchanged a glance with the woman beside him. Compact 50s, sharp eyes behind narrow glasses. She'd introduced herself only as Priya. "The Solon Group would like to offer you the position of Chief Executive Officer," Brennan said. "Effective immediately, full authority, 7-figure compensation package with equity." Vivian had been expecting a lot of things. Not that. The Solon Group was a mid-sized investment conglomerate with holdings in clean energy, logistics, and a failing pharmaceutical arm that had been bleeding cash for 18 months. 2 CEOs had come and gone in 4 years. The board was fractured. The company was 30 days from a hostile takeover bid that would gut it and sell the pieces. She'd been tracking them for 8 months, waiting for the right moment to make her move. "What's the condition?" she said. Because there was always a condition. Priya spoke for the first time. Her voice was precise, unhurried, like someone who never wasted words. "The Solon board has concerns. Not about your competence. Your record at Meridian Capital speaks for itself. Their concern is optics. Specifically, the optics of bringing in an outside executive during a hostile takeover attempt. They need the story to be about stability. Family. Permanence. They need me to be married," Vivian said. Priya didn't blink. "They need you to already be married, or to become so quickly." The room went quiet. Outside the windows, Chicago spread in every direction, gray and enormous and indifferent. "That's insane," Vivian said calmly. "It's unconventional," Brennan agreed. "Who?" Another exchanged glance. "His name is Ezra Cole. He's a mechanic. Works at a garage in Pilsen. He has a daughter, 6 years old. His wife died 18 months ago." Brennan paused. "He's agreed to the arrangement in exchange for financial security for himself and his child. The marriage would be for 1 year minimum, after which a quiet divorce and you both walk away with what was promised." Why him specifically? He was selected for reasons we're not at liberty to fully explain. "What we can tell you is that he has no connections to any of the families involved in the takeover bid. No financial entanglements, no social media presence." Priya studied Vivian over her glasses, and he signed an NDA before any of this was discussed. Vivian thought about her company, her real company, the consulting firm she'd spent 7 years building, which was currently surviving on 2 contracts and a prayer. The Solon CEO position would change everything. The platform, the capital, the credibility. She'd been trying to get through doors that kept closing in her face, and this was someone handing her the master key. "I want to meet him first," she said. Brennan looked slightly pained. "That's not typically how." "I want to meet him first," she repeated. "I'm not marrying a stranger I've never looked in the eye. That's not negotiable." Priya almost smiled. "Almost. Tomorrow, 2 o'clock, we'll arrange it." The garage occupied a corner lot in Pilsen that smelled like motor oil and lake wind. The sign out front read Vasquez Auto in letters that had faded to something between red and rust. Vivian stood on the sidewalk in her coat and watched through the open bay door as a man worked underneath a lifted pickup truck, visible only from the waist down. Worn boots, worn jeans, hands that moved with the kind of unhurried competence that didn't need an audience. "Help you?" An older man materialized at her elbow, wiping his hands on a shop rag. "I'm looking for Ezra Cole." The man, Vasquez, she assumed, didn't say anything, just turned toward the truck and said, "Ezra, someone here." The man on the creeper slid out from under the chassis, stood up, and looked at her. He was tall, lean but not slight, with forearms that said he'd been doing physical work for years. Dark eyes, dark hair in need of a cut, a face that had been handsome once and still was, just quieter about it. He looked at her the way mechanics looked at cars. Assessing, practical, no performance in it. "You're the lawyer," he said. "I'm the other party," Vivian said. Vivian Hartwell. Something shifted in his expression. He wiped his hands on a rag, dropped it over the truck's side mirror. "They told me you were coming. Did they tell you I was going to look you in the eye before I agreed to anything?" "No." A pause, but it makes sense. They ended up at the diner 2 doors down, both with coffee neither of them touched. The booth had a crack in the vinyl that Vivian kept noticing. Outside, the lunch crowd moved past the window. "You want to know why?" Ezra said. "I want to know everything they didn't tell me." He was quiet for a moment, not uncomfortable quiet, thinking quiet. She was already learning the difference. "My daughter's name is Rosie. She's 6. She starts 2nd grade in September." He looked at his coffee. "Her mother died 20 months ago. Stroke. Nobody saw it coming." A pause that had weight in it. "I've been okay. We've been okay. But okay isn't enough anymore. I need better than okay for her. And this is how you get it. This is how someone offered it to me." He met her eyes. "I'm not under any illusions about what this is. You need something. I need something. There's a transactional way to handle that." He stopped. "But I have a daughter, and I won't let her get caught in the middle of something she doesn't understand. So if you agree to this, I need to know how you're going to handle Rosie." Vivian thought about the right answer. Then she decided to give him the honest one instead. "I don't have experience with kids," she said. "I'm not going to pretend otherwise, but I'm not going to walk into your daughter's life and disappear again in a year without treating her like she matters. She matters because she matters to you, and if we're doing this, you matter. Both of you." Ezra studied her for a long moment. His eyes were harder to read than most people's, but she got the sense she was being assessed with the same practical precision he'd turned on her from across the garage. "Okay," he said finally. "Okay, we're doing this. Okay, you should meet Rosie first." Rosie Cole was 6 years old, gap-toothed, and absolutely certain that the best animal on Earth was the octopus, for reasons she explained at length while showing Vivian her bedroom, which was decorated almost entirely in ocean life. "They have 3 hearts," Rosie said, holding up a stuffed octopus that was nearly as big as she was, "and blue blood. And if they lose an arm, it grows back." She looked at Vivian with an expression of profound significance. "I think they're basically superheroes." "I think you're probably right," Vivian said, and meant it. Later, while Rosie was in the kitchen with her babysitter making what she'd announced would be the best grilled cheese in Chicago history, Ezra appeared beside Vivian in the doorway. "She doesn't warm up to people usually," he said quietly. "Really, she seemed pretty open. With kids, yeah, adults take longer." He was watching his daughter narrate her sandwich construction to an audience of one. "You're the first adult besides family she's shown the ocean room to." Vivian filed that away. Filed away the way he'd said it, too. Not like a compliment, just like a fact he was handing her. "Here, this is true. Do with it what you will." They had dinner, the 3 of them, at a small table in a small kitchen. Rosie ate half her grilled cheese and told Vivian that octopuses were actually shy, which was why most people didn't know how smart they were, and Vivian thought about what it meant to be underestimated and said she understood that completely. Rosie went to bed. Ezra walked Vivian to the door. "If we do this," she said, "I need honesty. No performance, no pretending we're something we're not when we're alone. I can do the public part, the events, the appearances, whatever the board needs to see. But in private, I want to know who I'm actually living with." "Same," he said. "And Rosie comes first, always. Non-negotiable. Understood." They stood in the doorway for a moment in the particular silence of 2 strangers who were about to become something without a good name for it. "There's more to you than the mechanic thing," Vivian said. It wasn't an accusation. Just the thing she'd been observing since the garage. "Everyone has things they don't talk about." "So do I," she said. "But if yours are going to affect me, they won't." She nodded, let it go. For now. She signed the contract 3 days later. They were married at the courthouse on a Thursday morning. Rosie was at school. The witnesses were Brennan and Priya, who stood like statuary and looked faintly impatient. The judge asked if they took each other, and they both said yes, the way you'd confirm a meeting time. Not cold, just careful. Professional. Afterward, the car that collected them was nicer than anything Vivian expected Ezra Cole to be associated with. A black SUV with a driver in a jacket who said, "Mr. Cole, welcome," and opened the door like he knew exactly who he was talking to. Vivian got in, watched the city move past the windows, turned to Ezra. "That's not mechanic money," she said. "No," he agreed. "It's not." He didn't elaborate. She let that sit too, the way you let a building settle before you push on the walls. The house was in Lincoln Park. A townhouse, 4 stories, the kind of building with crown molding and a chef's kitchen and a backyard garden that someone had been tending carefully all year. Rosie's room was on the 3rd floor and had a window seat overlooking a maple tree. Vivian's room was on the 2nd floor. It had its own bathroom, its own closet, its own entrance. They had been meticulous about that. Space, privacy, parallel lives under the same roof. But then Rosie came home from school. She walked through the front door, dropped her backpack, said, "Is this our house now?" "It smells like books," found the window seat in her room, and announced that she was never leaving. That night, at dinner, she asked Vivian if she liked octopuses. Vivian said she'd never thought much about them before this week, but she was coming around. Rosie took this very seriously and said she would compile a reading list. After Rosie was in bed, 2 stories, 1 glass of water, a brief negotiation about whether the stuffed octopus counted as a nightlight companion, which it did, Ezra came to find Vivian in the kitchen. "She's compiling you a reading list," he said. "I know. I'm honored." He almost smiled, just the corner of his mouth. "Coffee? Always." They sat in the new kitchen of their arranged life, drinking coffee at 10 at night like people who'd been doing this for years instead of hours. "Tell me something true," Vivian said. He looked at her over his cup. "What kind of something? Anything you'd usually keep to yourself." A long pause. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere outside, a car passed. "I miss her," he said. "Rosie's mom. Not every day the same way, but it's always there." He set his cup down. "And I'm tired of trying to be enough on my own. That's why I said yes to this. Not just the money. Because I'm tired. It was more than she expected. More than she deserved this early. My father left when I was 8, she said in return. My mother worked herself half to death to make up for it. I've been trying to prove I didn't need anyone's help since I was 9 years old." She looked at her coffee. "That's why I said yes to this, not just the opportunity. Because some part of me knew that needing something doesn't have to mean failing." They sat with that for a while. "Same time tomorrow?" he said. "Every night," she said. "Until we figure this out." Monday, Vivian walked into Solon Group headquarters in a suit that cost what her mother had made in a month, held her head level, and became CEO of a company that had been waiting to break her. The board was fractured, as expected. The CFO, a man named Warren Holt, no relation to the law firm, had been maneuvering for 2 quarters to position himself for a takeover. He was 53, well-connected, and convinced that Vivian was a temporary inconvenience. He tried to test her in the first executive meeting with numbers she wasn't supposed to know. She knew them. She'd spent the previous week memorizing every quarterly report Solon had filed in 4 years. When she walked him through the pharmaceutical division's actual losses versus his projected recovery timeline, politely, precisely, in front of the full executive team, something shifted in the room. Not defeat, something quieter. The acknowledgement that she was not who he'd prepared for. That evening, she came home to Rosie's reading list, printed and taped to the refrigerator. It had 7 items on it. 3 of them were picture books. She said to start with the picture books, Ezra told her, not quite hiding the smile. For context, very thorough, she gets it from somewhere. Vivian looked at him sideways. Her mother? A beat. "Yeah," he said, something softening briefly in his face. "Yeah, Diane was like that, organized to a fault." He handed Vivian her coffee. "Rosie has her instincts. I'm just trying not to sand them down." It was the most he'd said about Diane voluntarily. Vivian held it carefully. The way you hold something you know is fragile. 3 weeks in, she found the article. She hadn't been looking. She'd been searching for a financial contact in the pharmaceutical sector and typed a name wrong, and Google auto-completed her mistake into something she hadn't expected. Ezra Cross, tech founder and philanthropist, presumed dead after sailing accident off Lake Michigan. Body never recovered. She read it twice, then 3 times. The photo was 2 years old. Different haircut, different setting, expensive jacket. But the eyes were wrong in exactly the way Ezra Cole's eyes were wrong. That flat, assessing quality that noticed everything and performed nothing. She found him in the garage at the back of the townhouse, where he'd been tinkering with what appeared to be a vintage motorcycle, and said, "Ezra Cross." He went still, not startled. "Just still. You're not dead," she said. "Officially," he said, "I am." He explained the rest in the kitchen, with coffee, at 11 at night, while Rosie slept upstairs and the city moved outside, the real name. The tech company he'd founded at 26 and built into something significant. The investors who'd decided he was too independent, too resistant to their pressure, too much of a complication. The accident that wasn't an accident, a boat, a lake, a very close call that had been intended to be fatal. And Diane. She was in the car with Rosie, he said. His voice stayed even. But Vivian had learned to hear the things underneath even voices. Wrong place. They thought she was the target instead of me. She had a stroke 4 days later. The trauma. He stopped. The doctor said the physical stress from the accident. Vivian sat with that, with the full weight of what he'd just handed her. And you faked your death to protect Rosie, she said. I disappeared to make them think they'd succeeded. Bought time to figure out who was behind it. He looked at his hands. Ezra Cole is real. The garage is real. The life is real. The name is the only thing that's different. And this arrangement, she said slowly, the Solon position, the marriage, it's not just the board wanting optics. It's cover, he said. The people who tried to kill me are still connected, still watching. A mechanic from Pilsen who married a rising CEO and is building a quiet life, that's not a threat. That's someone who gave up. He met her eyes. It's the best way to stay invisible. Vivian considered leaving, considered it genuinely, the exit, the dissolution, the clean break back to her own complicated life. Then she thought about Rosie, asleep upstairs with her reading list and her ocean room, who'd already started leaving crayon drawings on Vivian's desk. I'm staying, she said. He looked at her like he wasn't sure he'd heard correctly. You're sure? I'm not sure of anything, she said, but I'm staying. The weeks that followed developed their own rhythm. Vivian ran Solon during the day, navigating Warren Holt's maneuvering, rebuilding the pharmaceutical division, earning the confidence of the board members who were still on the fence. Ezra maintained his cover. Rosie started second grade and brought home art projects at a volume that required a dedicated wall. Some nights they worked at the kitchen table together, Vivian on her laptop, Ezra on whatever he was tracking from his own quiet network of contacts. Rosie fell asleep between them on the couch with an octopus book on her chest. One evening, Vivian came home to find Ezra and Rosie building what appeared to be a cardboard submarine in the living room. It's for the octopuses, Rosie explained seriously. They need a habitat. Of course, Vivian said. You can add a porthole, Rosie offered, if you want. She did want. She sat on the floor in her work clothes and cut a circle out of construction paper, and Ezra handed her the tape without being asked, and for 20 minutes none of them were anything except the people in this room. Later, she caught him watching her from across the submarine wreckage, with an expression she hadn't seen on him before. Not the mechanic's assessment, something different, something that looked like it surprised him. What? She said. Nothing, he said. And then, because he'd been honest with her the same way she'd been honest with him, you didn't have to do that. The porthole. I know. She's going to remember it. Good, Vivian said. So will I. Warren Holt moved against her in the 7th week. It came as an email, formal and precise, seed to the full board, a motion to review the circumstances of her appointment, citing what he called irregularities in the selection process and questions about the personal relationships influencing board decisions. His language was careful, but the implication was clear. He knew or suspected that her marriage was not what it appeared to be. She didn't panic. She called Ezra from the car and told him. A pause on his end, then he's been digging. Someone on the board has been feeding him questions. Can you find out who? Already working on it. Another pause. Vivian. This might get more complicated before it gets simpler. I know. You can still step back from the Solon side of this. Take the severance they owe you and Ezra. She waited until he stopped. I'm not stepping back. Tell me what you need me to do. The silence on his end lasted long enough that she thought the call had dropped. I need you to be brilliant at that board meeting tomorrow, he said. I'll handle the rest. She was brilliant at the board meeting. She walked them through 6 months of Solon's recovery data, the pharmaceutical restructuring that had already halted the bleeding, the 2 partnership deals she'd closed that quarter. She let the numbers speak at a volume Warren Holt couldn't shout over. The motion to review failed 4-3. Afterward, Patricia Reyes, the board member who'd been silently supportive since the beginning, found Vivian in the hallway. That was impressive, she said, and necessary. She lowered her voice. Holt isn't done. He'll escalate. Let him. It's connected to the family that tried to take over in Q2, Patricia said. You know that. Vivian went very still, the Aldrich group. They're still circling. And if Holt can discredit you before the next board election, he won't, Vivian said. But thank you. She called Ezra from the parking garage. Tell me about the Aldrich group. A longer pause this time. Where did you hear that name? Patricia Reyes. Board meeting. Ezra, they're the investors, he said. His voice was flat in the way that meant he was working hard to keep it that way. The ones who arranged the accident. They've been trying to take over Solon for 2 years because Solon has something they want, a patent, clean energy storage, worth more than the company itself. And if they take control of Solon, they get the patent, and anyone who knew too much about how they operate becomes unnecessary. Vivian sat in the parking garage in the dark and thought about what unnecessary meant from people who had already made one person permanently unnecessary. Come home, she said. We need to plan. The threat materialized on a Tuesday night, 6 weeks later. Ezra's phone lit up at midnight with a message from a number she didn't recognize. He read it, went still in that particular way she'd learned meant serious, and said, "Get Rosie." They were out of the house in 8 minutes. Rosie, half asleep, carried in Ezra's arms and wrapped in a blanket, asking where they were going. "Adventure," he told her. The kind with a good ending. The safe house was a rented apartment in Evanston that Vivian hadn't known existed. Ezra had 2 of them, she'd learn later. Contingency planning the way other people kept umbrellas. They settled Rosie on a couch with her octopus and a murmured reassurance that her dad was right here, he wasn't going anywhere, and she was safe. She was asleep within minutes, the boneless sleep of complete trust. Vivian found Ezra at the window, phone in hand. "Tell me," he told her. The Aldrich group had a contact inside Solon, someone on the administrative level who'd been passing information. They'd figured out that Ezra Cole and Ezra Cross were the same person. They'd sent a message to the townhouse, physical, to prove they could access it. "Like a calling card," Vivian said. "An old-fashioned one. They want me to know they found me." He turned from the window. His face was controlled, but she could see the cost of it. "Which means they're ready to make a move. What kind of move? The kind that involves making sure I don't testify to what I know." Vivian stood in the safe house at 1 a.m. with her husband, who wasn't supposed to be alive, and thought about all the moments that had brought her here. The law office, the diner, the kitchen table, the cardboard submarine. "You've been preparing for this," she said. "Since the beginning, the evidence you took when you disappeared still exists. Documented, backed up, in the hands of a federal attorney I've been cooperating with for 2 years. He looked at her. "I've been building a case, waiting until I had enough to make it impossible to dismiss." He paused. "I was waiting until I was sure Rosie would be protected no matter what happened to me. And now I'm not alone anymore." He said it like it had surprised him, and that changes the calculation. Vivian crossed the room and sat on the radiator by the window, which was warm and slightly uncomfortable and real. "What do you need?" she said. "I need you to go to the board, lay out what Aldrich is doing, what they've been doing. The patent, the manipulation, the contacts inside the company. Patricia Reyes will back you." He met her eyes. "I need the board to know before Aldrich can move. It becomes a public matter, the advantage. And you. I'll handle the federal side. My attorney is ready. We've been ready for 6 months. Ezra." She waited until he looked at her. "If something happens, it won't. But if it does." "Rosie, she has Rosa," he said. "The babysitter. She's family, not just an employee. She has my brother in Portland." He stopped. "She has you." The words settled between them with more weight than either of them acknowledged. "She has me," Vivian agreed. The board meeting was the most important 45 minutes of Vivian Hartwell's professional life. She walked them through everything. The Aldrich Group's manipulation of Solon's struggling divisions, the deliberate sabotage of 2 deals in Q3, the contact they'd planted inside administrative, the patent they were maneuvering to acquire through hostile takeover. She had documentation for all of it, compiled with Ezra's guidance, verified by the federal attorney cooperating on his case. Warren Holt said nothing for 30 seconds. Then he said, "These are serious allegations. They're documented facts," Vivian said. "Would you like to see the federal filing, Mr. Holt, or do you already know what's in it?" The implication landed. She watched him decide how to respond, watched him calculate whether she was bluffing, watched him arrive at the conclusion that she was not. He was escorted from the building 2 hours later, pending an internal investigation. The vote to retain Vivian as CEO was unanimous. The Aldrich Group's leadership was indicted on federal charges 8 weeks later. The evidence Ezra had been building for 2 years, combined with Vivian's documentation of what they'd done to Solon, was enough to dismantle the operation entirely. The man who'd arranged the accident wasn't at a trial yet, but he was in custody. It was over. Not cleanly, not without cost, but over. Ezra came home that evening and found Vivian and Rosie in the living room. The cardboard submarine had been repurposed into a spaceship. Rosie was explaining orbital mechanics with confidence that exceeded her expertise, and Vivian was taking careful notes on a legal pad. He stood in the doorway for a long moment. Rosie noticed him first. "Daddy, we're going to space. I can see that. Vivian's the captain. I'm the navigator. You can be the engineer because you know about engines." "That seems right," he said. Later, after Rosie was asleep and the spaceship had been parked in the corner of the living room for tomorrow's mission, Vivian found Ezra on the back porch. The Chicago night was cold and clear, stars visible in the gaps between clouds. "How are you?" she said, relieved. He considered it. "Strange. I've been preparing for that to be over for 2 years, and now it is, and I don't quite know what to do with myself. You could try living." He looked at her sideways. "Yeah, That's an option now, she said, in case nobody mentioned it. The quiet between them was different than it used to be. Fuller, less careful. The contract is up in 4 months, he said. She looked at the stars. I know. You could walk away. Take everything we promised you. Rebuild your consultancy. Do it properly this time with the platform Solon gave you. He paused. You should probably. That was the deal. The deal, she said, has been renegotiated several times already. Vivian Ezra. She turned to look at him. She'd spent the last several months learning his face. The shuttered version, the thinking version, the rare version that appeared when Rosie said something that made him forget to be guarded. She knew which one she was looking at now. I came into this arrangement looking for a professional opportunity. That's it. That was the whole calculation. She stopped. I ended up with something that didn't fit the calculation, and I'm not interested in pretending otherwise. He was quiet for a moment. I've been calling you my wife for 4 months to people who don't know it's not. It is, technically. To people who don't know it was a transaction, he said, and somewhere in the middle of all of it, I stopped thinking of it that way. So did I. Another quiet. Somewhere in the alley, something small moved through the leaves. I want to ask you something, he said. And I need you to know I'm asking it without the contract, without the board, without any of the reasons that brought us here. Okay, will you stay? Vivian looked at this man who had been hiding for 2 years, who had built a life out of survival and stubbornness and love for a 6-year-old girl who believed in octopuses, who had let her in slowly and deliberately and with his whole careful heart. Yes, she said. He exhaled like he'd been holding something for a long time and had finally set it down. They told Rosie in the morning. Vivian had worried about it, what to say, how to frame it, whether a 6-year-old's understanding of permanent was the same as an adult's. She didn't need to worry. Rosie listened to the explanation that Vivian was going to stay, really stay, not just for the year, but for as long as they wanted her, with the focused attention she usually reserved for documentaries about deep-sea creatures. Then she said, like a family, Ezra confirmed. Rosie considered this. Can we get a fish? Vivian almost laughed. Maybe. Start small. An octopus is technically a fish. It really isn't. I'll put it in the reading list, Rosie said very seriously and went to find a pencil. The wedding, the real one, the one that meant something, happened on a Sunday afternoon in November. Small, deliberate. Rosie in a blue dress she'd chosen herself. Ezra's brother driving in from Portland. Patricia Reyes, who had become something close to a friend. The federal attorney who'd worked the case because it felt right to include him. The judge asked if they took each other. This time, they both paused before they said yes, not with hesitation, but with the particular weight of people who understood what they were agreeing to. Afterward, they had dinner at a restaurant Rosie had selected because, she explained, it had the best calamari in Chicago, which was technically an octopus relative, and this felt significant. Vivian sat at the table between her husband and her daughter and thought about the woman who'd walked into a law office 10 months ago with nothing but a failing consultancy and a blazer without wrinkles. That woman had believed that success meant acquisition, the right title, the right platform, the right amount of leverage. She still believed in those things. She'd earned them. But sitting in a restaurant with Rosie explaining the evolutionary advantages of cephalopods, and Ezra quietly refilling her water glass without being asked, and the future arranged in front of her like something she had actually built rather than stumbled into. She understood that she'd been measuring wrong. The real thing wasn't the thing you acquired. It was the thing you chose. Every day, even when choosing, was harder than leaving. She reached over and took Ezra's hand under the table. He turned it palm up without looking at her, the way people do when they've done something 1,000 times without ever planning to. And Rosie, who noticed everything, looked up from her calamari and said very solemnly, "You should probably always hold hands. For safety." "For safety," Vivian agreed. "It's what the octopuses do," Rosie said. "When they find their person, they hold on." Vivian looked at Ezra. He looked back at her, and the corner of his mouth did what it always did when Rosie said something that broke through all his careful control. "Then that's what we'll do," Vivian said. And they did.